up here to do with me in the morning. She's very shy, and now that she started doing it, I'm kind of leery to push her off. But let's carry on.
Oh, okay. Well, hey, my initial thought was just the idea, kind of following through on that idea that, like, if there were going to be these annotatathons, I thought it would be interesting. You know, if the annotatathons are primarily youth focused, I thought it would be reasonable and sensible and productive to try to arrange some for adults, so they feel like, in addition to knowing that something's going to happen, they also have an opportunity to get through it themselves. And I think that there are real challenges and barriers to, like, oh, I'm used to annotation being a solitary activity that I can collect from students and see their thinking.
Sure.
And now I have, like, potentially, you know, like you mentioned, you know, you get 10 people annotating an article, like, you could get a mess in the margins.
Yeah.
Or you can get something beautiful in the margins. But so my rough idea was just use that article because it's a place where teachers can share their thoughts about annotation potentially. So really just thinking about, like, 3 ways teachers could annotate is just, like, obviously just to make meaning of the article, and then questions for other teachers or suggestions, like annotations that are really meant for a teacher audience, not about making meaning. And then the third thing you could do is you could write an annotation that is really geared toward Jeremy because he's one of the co-authors. And I think that shows a level, like, sort of 3 different levels of reading, or 3 different reading purposes. Like, I'm going to read to discuss with a teacher audience, or I'm going to read to discuss with an author. Those are reasons to annotate socially. And those are my 3 ideas, other than the idea that I think if we do supports right, then they watch a video to get ready in advance, and the actual annotatathon could be 30 minutes. And I'm thinking 30-minute engagements might attract more people.
Yeah. I more and more I'm beginning to think that, I mean, I like your approach. So you've got your rhetorical audience is going to be teachers and the author and yourself or other readers maybe. You're making a comment for other readers. And I think that's, I mean, there's lots and lots of ways to go about this, but, you know, that's as good as any. And I think what will happen is that, you know, it's like in your protocols you use for facilitating last summer, you know, you know more than anybody how often the protocol was just a way to get started. Give people just the bare scaffolding so they can begin to create the kind of index the meaning as they're walking through it. So I think that'd be great. And the other thing that I didn't get to talk about the other night with Jeremy, and it's a big issue. It's one where how do you gather the information when you're done and reflect on it and make signal out of the noise? Because like you said, you get 10 people on there, and you know, you got a lot of signal from those 10 people, which ends up being noise. And then how do you tease out that, you know, which is what I think in your idea of having a 30-minute session, and then maybe with 10 minutes to reflect, or a 20-minute session and 10 minutes to reflect. If you just wanted to make sure it was short. Something at the end where, okay, I got this mess of stuff here. It was really interesting. The process itself is worth doing, but where does it go after that? Which I think, you know, personal annotations, it doesn't have to go anywhere, right? Mm-hmm. Just in your own head, you're internalizing something, you're summarizing something. I mean, that's what I've personally, when I get out of annotation, is that sense of, okay, I understand it now, or I understand it better. You know, especially if you find somebody who's been writing about a topic or talking about a topic for 20 years, they're in expert mode, right? And you know, there's so much that's packed that the only way to get at even a little bit of it is to do that close reading and that annotation. And that's the benefit I get personally, and I guess professionally as well. is that sense of, okay, I understand it better. I've got more of a handle on it, and then I can use it in my classes or personally, right?
Right.
So I think, any kind of protocol we use is going to be just fine as long as it's simple.
Right. Yeah. And I think, like, just to add on to what you're saying, I think that you in particular have like worked with so many annotation tools in a public way, sharing them in, collaborative settings. And it's like, when you talk about your annotating purpose, I think about the potential, like, huge divide between how you like see it and experience it. Cause you're, our annotation expert, like you're an annotation expert for lack of a better term, and then you think about a student who is assigned annotation in a classroom to potentially write a letter to the next president. And you can think about a student kind of going, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And I think
exactly.
And that's where the idea that, like, some tangible practice for teachers starts to get some of these expert minds to, to unpack what's useful. And then, and the other thing I would echo is, with the idea that you can annotate for three purposes, like, I think that is to get people started and to lay the framework for, like, kind of a straw man in terms of, like, our purpose. Because I personally would want people to leave those three ways very quickly to surprise us and to be creative.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. There's so many ways I haven't mentioned when I mentioned there's three ways to annotate. But
right.
I wonder about the reflection part, though. For me, it's like, if the annotatathon is 30 minutes and then we want people to be able to reflect, I wonder if that is something that might be done asynchronously, via blogs or in that CL MOOC Facebook group or anywhere, or you name it, only because
right.
I think sometimes that experience might be a lot for people, but it also, especially if somebody is, like, unsure, it might be great to have it might be great to have someone like your reflection about it, like, written down alongside several others. So there's a digital footprint from that reflection. Teachers saying that was worthless, or that was a challenge, or this was inspiring. Having that happen asynchronously, the same way a good reading should maybe sit with you and you might return to a text. If that reflection piece is asynchronous, that might be an interesting digital footprint, especially if NWP is thinking about larger annotate the web ideas down the road. Because if 75% of the people or more that you meet with go, why annotate socially? Like, that's a bitch in the classroom. Why would I do that?
Yeah,
it makes sense to the struggling, and it's not so useful. Yeah.
So maybe what we could do is we could simply say, you just make that reflective part optional, and you make the case for it, and then just give people a few minutes at the end to say what they want to say. Like, I observe this, or see this, or, just observations instead of reflections. And that when people get into something, I know when we do these things where we work on a collective Google Doc, like for CL MOOC, those are always great because, they're alive, and then people just kind of chatter about it. And, we may forget about what we chatted about, but I think it's part of that social dynamic that's so important when you're doing collaborative work. I mean, so often is I don't remember what we talked about, but I remember who I talked about with it. So that, it is social, and it's reciprocative, and it's just there's a lot going on there. It's complex, but in a really, really good way. Because it's okay. So we do the annotation. We have a common experience. Then we talk about it a little bit, and then it's okay. That's a whole thing. We got to gestalt there for that, and then we can give them the reflective thing and say, okay, yeah, I think that would work. I mean, okay, suggest. Okay, this is how I'm seeing it. Suggest these three ways of annotating, and say, but of course, you can stray from the protocol. Let's do it, and then let's talk a little bit at the end, and then we'll have an optional activity if you want to go further with it.
Right.
Does that sound?
I
Sounds
think
like
that,
fun.
I think that's right, because then it's something you could say, hey, that was great. Let's try it again next week with a different text, or and, you know, and I could see groups breaking off of it, and I could see it being 2 people, or I could see it being 20 people, and I think you know those all have implications for teacher practice. So one thing, and this might be a little bit too ambitious or too quick, but I was thinking Monday might be interesting if we could do it in Monday evening, because Tuesday is when the State of the Union. And so for somebody to have, for even a small group of interested folks to have like that built background before they actually go see what happens at whitehouse.gov, they were interested. It's like you got this background built, and now you might just go, whether you join in or not, you might just go see what kind of annotations people put around that State of the Union.
Yeah.
We could point to Tuesdays.
I think it's a great idea. I'd love to do something like that. And, you know, it's a little bit meta to do something like that New York Times article that Jeremy wrote, but that's a really great article. In fact, I remember referencing that article somewhere else during DigiRimo in November, because I did like 4 different annotation activities that month on their, you know, I did 4 different posts and 4 different kinds of annotation activities, and that was one of the things I referenced. So, you know, if we use that article, I've got it. It's not that long, is it?
No, I mean, but it is long though, and it's enough that it deserves 30 minutes of attention. Yeah. The other thing I think is, like, I mean, that article, the first time I read it, I wanted to have a talk with teachers about it, because it's like, it's one thing for me to read it and nod my head, and it's another thing for me to say, yeah, you know, I'm interested to like see how other people perceive this, because me thinking about digital tools, you know, I'm the early adopter, and I'm like, great, let's try it. And I really liked kind of the academic focus of the article, and just kind of how it's you know, it is geared so directly towards a teacher audience that I'm interested in. Yeah,
I love it. Yeah, and it's what I think is, you know, if you've got this low barrier to entry tool, and I think Hypothesis is probably the lowest low bar tool there is out there right now that is still social and shareable, and there's low risk of failure, right? We create a safe to fail space for people, which, you know, that might include just lurking, which is fine. Then we have, you know, that whole notion of Henry Jenkins talks about it, and Ito and Dana Boyd talk about in that book of theirs, this notion of participatory culture, where this is just another space, participatory culture space, just like fan fiction space is, and, you know, forums are, and, you know, the like. So, but I think it has a really nice path to it, and as long as we don't muck it up with being too complex and requiring too much, then I think it's, you know, if people want to do more of it, then they'll seek it out. And I think it's really good to, I don't know the nuts and bolts of how we do it as a Google Hangout, but, you know, we might even leave the Google Hangout going while we're doing it, so that people can chat, or they can turn off their headphones and, you know, go on and off. You know, I don't know how we want to do it as far as having multiple channels going at the same time. But
I'm of 2 minds about it, and I tend to just say, oh, you know, you give the participants a choice. But it does seem like if you're doing a hangout on air, and you can kind of try to, again, a protocol that people should break. It's like, hey, and during this time, we're going to be silently reading, and the discourse is going to be in Hypothesis, saying that. Yeah. Then there's potential, if everyone shares their screen, which is another thing that can just give people a little bit of a challenge. The cameraman can go around can't they? I think, and focus on the different screen shares, right?
Yeah, I think they can.
That might lay out a pretty interesting digital footprint. Just the idea that like we're looking at a text and I can click on what any given person is doing if I'm not annotating. I think that's pretty interesting. And the other benefit of that is that if somebody's having a technical challenge with hypothesis, they're not having it alone. It goes in the chat and they rectify it right away.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds really possible. That sounds like fun.
Yeah.
That sounds like fun. Sounds like a lot of fun.
Right.
And let's do it. Let's do it on Monday. Let's do it Monday evening.
And let's get a shared doc going, and we'll and let's just invite people. And I think the first person to invite is Jeremy. And even if he's going to respond like the next day, or if he can commit to looking at annotations that are directed at him at some point. Okay. Right on, Mr. Elliott. Appreciate it.
Okay, so would you start the Google Doc?
Yeah, I'll start.
Doc. Okay, and we can go in there and just chat. We can just chat back and forth there about some of the stuff we've talked about here.
Yes, sir.
One of the things that occurs to me is that, a protocol that I've started using was simply having like in a letter, dear. There would be dear Jeremy, or to Jeremy, or something like that in front of an annotation, which is I've just started doing that a little bit, and it kind of makes sense to give a reader a little bit of a navigation point. But that's that just occurs to me right now that there's a lot of subtlety in this that would be lost by somebody using it for the first time. So yeah, okay. So cool. You start the doc and send it to me, and I'll work on it, and we'll go back and forth, and I'll do. Do you want me to do some marketing for this? Do you want to try this as a limited group of people? How do you want to do it?
I think that my first thought is like, yes, let's try to get it somewhat messy, right? Like if we get too many for a hangout, that's fine. That we'll just have to be smart about our audience, and we'll have to like share time or think about it as a fishbowl type setting. But my thinking is like, yeah, let's push it out, because worst case scenario is we get 5 or 8 interested folks. I think 5 or 8 interested folks is a really good experiment. And if we get 40 reading that article and hypothesis is everywhere and it's messy on the margins, I think that is also a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'm really of a mind that stress testing almost every place is a good idea, because we don't do that often enough, and we go into, as teachers especially, we go into something and we don't know whether it's worthy or not. We haven't tested it, so I think inviting people. So I'll get I've been playing around with that some more newsletter thing that I've used before, and I'll work on that. So we can both throw nuts and bolts stuff into the Google Doc, and I'll pull information, about when, where, how to access into that newsletter, some more newsletter, and we'll send that out to people, or we'll make it available on Twitter and Google Plus communities.
Awesome.
Okay.
Cool. Great, Terry. Thanks so much.
Sounds like a lot of fun, Joe. So I'll see you on the Google Doc.
Okay. See you, Terry.